I asked an influential member of state government to listen to one of our podcasts.
Oh, God.
And her reply was, "Wow, you guys really know how to beat something to death." And I said, "Yeah, we do." It was the one where we spent 40 minutes on the first subject.
Oh,
what was
God.
It? It was about It was an Abrams thing, president, something like that. But we all looked at it and go, "Man, we just spent 40 minutes."
I still thought it was interesting. Part of it is when I say, all right, let's move on, I get one more thing.
Yes, I know.
Welcome to the Georgia Politics Podcast. It is Friday, June 7th. I am your host, Preston Thompson. We've got a great listener mailbag episode for you today. Had some questions piling up recently. Didn't have a lot of particular individual topics inspire me, so we're just going to hit a lot of things very quickly. Of course, very quickly on this show.
Always.
Doesn't mean very quickly. Let's go around and introduce our panel for the day. A couple familiar faces. To my right is...
I'm Hans Appen, Appen Media Group, Appen Podcast Network.
This is Craig Kidd, first vice chairman of the Fulton GOP and chief of staff to the mayor of Johns Creek.
Welcome back, Craig.
Thank you.
After a short hiatus.
I know.
Is this your first mailbag episode?
It is.
Well, I guess it's only our second.
It's only been us two,
so
yeah.
It would be your first.
It's okay.
It is, but I did listen to the episode that I missed. I joked, I laughed that you guys were talking about the state GOP convention when
Without
one of your regular guys was actually there on the floor.
Well, it's not our fault you wouldn't come back.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't remember why. I don't remember what I was doing.
Because you knew it was on the agenda.
Yeah, that's it. No.
Okay. Very relevant to our first question. Listener Jeff in Milton asks, Craig's already putting on the face for this one. Is Speaker Ralston's response to his accusers enough? Do you buy that it's just politically motivated? So let's read a portion of his response real quick for the listeners. This is from the Speaker Ralston's attorney. This group does not care about either woman and are only seeking to further their self-interested goals and obtain media attention. The bar should not allow such political nonsense to sully its disciplinary procedure. Now, just as a short refresher, Speaker Ralston was accused earlier this year of overusing the legislative delay privileges of a legislator to delay court cases essentially out of existence, delay them for multiple years, sometimes upwards of 14, 15 years, to where witnesses' stories kind of get lost, they move, and kind of delaying them out of existence. Now, this kind of went away for a little while after that Joint Commission came out with some rules that essentially a judge could deny a legislative delay. But at the Republican convention, there were some people going around, and Craig, you can talk about how big of a contingency that was, going around asking for Ralston's resignation. So
including Matt Gertler.
Yeah, well, yeah, as to be expected. So is this kind of response, is this line of thinking that, this is just a politically motivated attack, is that enough? Or, is there kind of a missing personal responsibility here?
Well, let me answer that in two parts. Yes, I agree with every word that was said. I believe that it's accurate. However, I do not believe that's going to end it.
Sure.
So I'll answer your question in two very different ways. I do believe that this particular effort is politically motivated. I think that if you looked at the roster of the representatives who were speaking loudest about it were political opponents of Ralston before this came out. I'll refer once again back to Matt Gertler. With a couple of exceptions, these were the people who did not think Ralston was conservative enough. They thought that they were limiting their efforts to pass very specific, more conservative legislation like RFRA and other pro-life constitutional carry and some other pro-life measures. So I don't think that they can hide their previous records on it. Now, is Ralston's response going to end it? Is it sufficient to end it? No way in hell. I mean, they're going to keep going because what they're doing is working. They're getting media attention. The media is loving this story, and they're going to keep going. There's no negative for them to keep going. They're already out of the trench. You might as well keep running.
Well, the story first came into the limelight through some joint reporting through AJC, WSB, and then, like you said, I think some more conservative members of the state legislature jumped onto it. But, as a voter in the state, it still strikes me that, like, the people who are pushing it, sure, I would grant you are politically motivated, but it doesn't change the nature of the story, which can be pretty egregious in some elements of it. So, I don't think the rule change that they came up with was enough. I have my own thoughts about Speaker Ralston, but I'm trying to just remove him from the situation almost and just say, should this kind of thing be acceptable? And even if it is being pushed in the media by certain people with ideologies that disagree with them, like if that's to me the whipped cream of the more substantial reason why you would want him to not have those powers anymore.
Well, and I agree, Preston. I think one thing that I have learned over the years is that in the world of politics, when presented with a black and white option, it's often not black and white.
Sure.
So I think in this case, of course, yes, it's very politically motivated, and there's probably also likely legitimacy to the complaints. Two things can be true at the same time. So I agree. I don't think this story's going away, but I don't think it's because of one faction or another. I think they both have some credibility.
Every time we talk about this, I ask just, general feeling the temperature, odds that he's still speaker in, a year or two.
I think he's still speaker when they reconvene in January. Whether he's still speaker in January of 21, I think is a different question.
Let's assume
the
Republicans,
GOP keeps the majority. Right. If you put a gun to my head, like the dog with Doug Kenny, I would say he would be, but I wouldn't bet a dime on it.
Okay.
Put a percentage on it?
No.
30%.
That he is still speaker?
That he is not still speaker.
That's about where I would put it.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 to 30.
There's still, the caucus is still run by the rural part of the Georgia majority, and they love Ralston.
Sure.
They don't care in Vidalia.
And we should know
about this.
He's at times he's been every Democrat's favorite Republican too. Right. So
I don't know how long you want to spend on this, but let's say he's up again, and then Gertler, he'd be a bad example, but Clark, they say, okay, well, we can vote for Ralston again, or we could vote for somebody else, or we could vote for the Democrat and really throw this into an uproar. Are they willing to do that? Are they willing to take the next step? And I don't even think they even know the answer to that question.
Well, and what doesn't benefit is I think, now we're getting into procedural stuff, but I think on the federal level, for some cases like this, they do secret ballots.
No.
They don't? Maybe I'm just saying,
no,
because I think the Democrats, when they were talking about Pelosi, maybe internally they just did a secret ballot.
Within their own caucus,
not as
not
a
on the
recorded
floor.
vote.
No, on the floor it is very public. In fact, it's arguably the most public thing that the U.S. House of Representatives does.
So does a secretive vote change whether or not Ralston's odds to be speaker again?
I would imagine Ralston would control the process in which the vote is counted. If he's not, he's not the leader that I think he is, and then I would imagine he would make it public.
He who counts the votes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to our first question in by voicemail. If we've got that queued up, Daniel, we'll go ahead and hear what that listener has to say.
Hi, guys. This is Jennifer from Johns Creek. Big fan of the show. My question is this. What issues do you see being important in the 2020 Georgia legislative session? Thanks so much. Can't wait to hear for your answer. Bye-bye.
Speaking of.
Well, last week we talked a little bit about Common Core and Governor Kemp's statements on that and how that might be coming up. I don't know if that's next year. It might be a little bit later. The Medicaid plan that the waivers that Kemp applied for, the plan has to be done and submitted by July, so that might be a topic of discussion. Any other thoughts from either of you?
So walk me through that, Preston. It's a topic of conversation, right? But it doesn't need to be voted on again.
No, the vote has been cast. Right. I mean, it's within the governor's authority to submit the plan to the federal government for what he would hope for is some money.
So whatever he submits goes.
The legislative end is over.
Yeah, it's over.
Right.
But, the consultant's been hired. I think last week they were hired for a little under the state budget. It was like $2 million. There's not really anything they can do, but I still imagine they'll be taking questions on it as elements of the plan come out. I'd imagine in like March it'll come out that the plan has a work requirement or something, and then it will still be a topic of conversation. Okay. But no, there is nothing they can do.
I think this is going to be a small year session. We already know it's going to be short.
It's an election year.
It's an election year. That's the biggest thing. You have qualifying in the middle of the session, which is a new thing in Georgia politics, which I hate. I hate the idea that qualifying is occurring right in the middle of it. So I think you're going to see a lot of small bills that that legislative geeks and lobbyists will love. Small little issues with problems with the code, this issue over here, but nothing that's really going to catch the imagination of the public at large. I imagine there'd be some form of a tax cut, for lack of a better term, because it is an election year, but something that they can grasp on a little bit more easily from a campaign perspective. But anything really large and overarching, I'd be very surprised.
The court fights for House Bill 481 start January 1st. But that, I mean, we all, I think, understand how court fights could go. That could take months, years. There's no telling when that would come in. Give me some more context about filing during the session and why you think that's qualifying. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Why I think it's a bad thing?
Yeah. First of all, when did it used to be?
It used to be the primary was back in the summer.
Sure.
It'd bop around. It'd be in July. It'd be in August. So qualifying was in May. So it was well after the legislation would adjourn in early April. I dislike it because it's mixing two processes at the same time that shouldn't be necessarily mixed. And they're not, and they don't go out of session during qualifying. At least they have in the past. Maybe they'll change this year. So they'll be upstairs legislating, and they'll run downstairs qualifying, and run back up to continue the session. I just think that's sort of mixing oil and vinegar at the same time. I think it's just bad form.
Was it eat where you work or something like that?
Yeah, sure. That'd be another metaphor.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem right.
No, I agree with you.
So, Preston, let me ask you another question. So, someone who employs a lot of journalists, where will we stand with this journalist integrity board that was proposed right towards the end of last session?
The legislator that put that forward immediately announced after that he's retiring.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like almost a day.
Forget retiring. He's resigning.
So he won't even
be around the next session. He was resigning. So
it's
there's
not,
a special
I don't
coming
even
up.
think he was finishing the term out.
This was a screw you, middle finger. I hate all of you. I could use more explosive words. Bye.
Yeah, I think you have more to worry about from the municipal level. I forget the story that came out a couple months ago that a municipality was trying to change some of the rules and regulations around that. So I think that's probably more where your head should be. I don't expect that to come up, especially like Craig mentioned, in an election year too. I think people are more willing to. They want the journalists to be their friends.
The media in an election year.
I mean, the Peachtree City effort was slapped down fairly harshly.
Very harshly.
I mean, they were embarrassed on the effort, and I don't know anything about Peachtree City politics, but I imagine assuming that they have elections up this year, that would be an issue in the fall.
Yeah, I would think that's mostly
behind
us.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Martha from District 7. What does Renee Unterman's now official entrance to the District 7 race do to the race? Craig, we'll start with you.
Well, let me throw a caveat here. I love Renee Unterman. I used to work for Renee Unterman. Renee Unterman used to pay me, and I have already expressed to Renee that I will do anything that she needs me to do to help her win.
If you're nice enough now, maybe she'll pay you again. Yeah.
I don't need it. I don't need it right now. Renee can spend her money on other things. Well, I mean, it adds a high quality candidate to the race. Renee is a bit of a I don't want to use the word crazy because that's always a negative way, but she's sort of
unfiltered,
not traditional. If you have all these people out there who want candidates to be real, who want them to be thinking out of the box, who want them to be a little crazy, go up, very Trump-like, go up there and mess with the system. And I'm not going to do it the old boys network kind of way. I'm going to do a new way, for the people. Renee has that element to her. I mean, in her career in the House and in the Senate, she had that reputation of being, I can't think this morning, of being non-traditional,
speak it like you mean it.
Non-traditional kind of politician.
Maverick,
but in a positive way, not in a Gertler way. I mean, you never saw her on a voting record going completely off the reservation. But yeah, she has that in her. The negative to her running is, unfortunately, in my opinion, on the GOP side, and the media's already gotten this angle going, is that this is putting the heartbeat bill front and center because she was the author of it.
So that's what I was going to mention.
And her political consultant, whoever it will be, will say, keep going with it because you're here to win the Republican primary. Worry about November later. I mean, you don't run.
Yeah, we'll go back to the middle.
You don't run your whole campaign around it, but you don't shy away from it. There's a difference between doing what Udall in Colorado did and not building your whole campaign around it. So that's going to keep it front and center. I imagine Renee will campaign off of it a little bit. She'd be a fool not to.
Yeah, she was right at the governor's right hand when it was signed too. Not only did she author it, but yeah.
If that's the case, she's not hired her political consultant then yet, because the heartbeat bill, in my opinion, was noticeably absent from her announcement.
I have not seen
getting
it.
into the race.
Okay.
It was. But I do think, whether she talks about it or not, it will be the identifying factor.
You can campaign on something without talking about it. You can send mailers, you can send robocalls, etc., to identified conservative pro-life voters, saying simply, "I was the author of that bill. It wouldn't have happened because of me." And then you turn around and you go give a speech to the Chamber of Commerce and you don't mention it at all.
Well, and it's a sometimes your fundraising issues are different from your stump issues. So HB 41 is a Republican primary's best fundraising issue she could probably hope for.
Well, and you can guarantee Carolyn Bordeaux is going to be campaigning off of it, and it will be a topic of conversation in any sort of debates that happen. So it will definitely be a topic of conversation whether Renee Unterman wants it to be or not.
I see her as probably the immediate front runner of that race. She's the only person that's entered that race to my memory that I haven't looked at their name and immediately had to Google them.
I would as well, for a very simple, quantifiable reason. Renee has been involved in Eastern Gwinnett politics forever. She was a Gwinnett County Commissioner back in the 90s. She was the mayor of Loganville. She was a state rep. Then she became a state senator. So she has been around for a very long time. I used to write direct mail for her, and I love the fact that she had this resume that the pieces wrote themselves because of her resume. Now that was back in the 90s when having experience wasn't as much of a taboo as it is now. But people in Eastern Gwinnett know the name Unterman.
And she's already been noting that even before she entered the race a couple weeks ago. She sent a tweet towards Lynn Homrick, who's running for the same seat, claiming that she's more of a Buckhead lady than she is a Gwinnett lady or something like that.
And she has strong ties to the medical community, to the hospital community. She's a retired nurse as well. And I don't know how personal Renee is going to make it, but Renee's life in particular, she's had a very tough life. And a lot of voters really like a candidate personalizing themselves. You don't see as much of that on the Republican side as you do on the Dem side. But Renee has a very interesting story to tell. She's had a tough personal life.
She emphasized it a lot during the HB 41 debate, actually, as part of a personal experience.
both of her kids were adopted. She couldn't have kids, so she adopted two wonderful kids. And so that so you're going to tell somebody who adopted two kids from a purely abortion issue, you're not going to shake somebody on that front. One of her kids died. I mean, if she wants to open up and talk about that, she can make some headway with that. I don't mean that to sound crass, but voters like to hear their politicians be human, and she can do that.
Yeah.
And one more thing to answer the question directly. Rumor has it Todd Jones is considering also entering the race, and we've talked a lot about Gwinnett, but Forsyth plays a significant role in that district as well. What's the likelihood? What is Renee getting into the race? What kind of effect does that have on somebody like a Jones jumping in or staying out?
It should slow him down, but I don't think it will. I'm not convinced Todd will jump into the race. I have not spoken with him about it. I've spoken to him about other things. But you're right about Forsyth. Forsyth has a has a larger overproportional influence in the GOP primary than it does in November. A buddy of mine estimated that it would be about 35% of the GOP primary vote. Now, I don't think Todd Jones can claim he's only a two-term rep. He doesn't even represent all the Forsyth part that's in the 7 CD, so he can't claim that much of a home field advantage. But that's a nice base to have for Todd. But you have to remember, under the Democrats' bad map, Renee, back in the aughts, Renee represented part of Forsyth County in the Senate. So slight name there as well. Very slight, though.
Yeah, she will more than likely have a great fundraising start, a great team surrounding her. I think this is a kind of clearing the field sort of announcement, maybe
clearing a field of some lessers. But
sure,
there was another candidate.
I think Lynn Homrick is here to stay. So
there was another candidate who was introduced in Savannah at the state convention, Dr. McCormick, who just looks like a candidate from Central Casting. I mean, I don't want to overharp on the issue, but I don't know anything about his politics. I don't know if he's Goldwater or Rockefeller. But he looks like the captain of the high school football team. His wife looks like the head cheerleader. The guy, was military. He's a doctor. I mean, he looks like he runs marathons. I mean, he just looks like the
Pulled
golden.
out of a magazine.
He looks like the golden boy, and his wife looks like the golden girl. And you can't underestimate that, unfortunately, in politics. So I think he has a lot of potential as well.
Hans, how about another listener question? Hit us with one.
We're passing these questions around. I'll take the next one. We've got Robert from Savannah. Can things go back to normal after this disaster relief process? What kind of damage was done?
You've actually been the one who's talked about this the most, I think, on the show. Why don't you give us
Feels like we
your
need an
thoughts?
agriculture expert to answer that
I know,
question.
at least a little. Well, we're thinking in more of a degrading of political norms sense.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to say. It depends on what perspective you take this from, because there's a political impact. There's a real world economic and lifestyle impact that I think obviously that's the most important thing, and none of us are experts on that. So I will touch on the political side of things. It like we said, it's an election year coming up, and I don't think this fares well for incumbents in office. We saw relief packages for Hurricane Katrina take weeks. And this was 7-8 months.
7 months.
7 months. With Republicans largely in control of the process. So I don't think it's a good thing for any incumbents in office. Does it swing districts in rural Georgia? I don't know about that. But in an election where the margins really make a difference, could it flip a Senate seat? Maybe.
There'd be three politicians would be on. I guess four politicians would be on the ballot that could be most directly related to it. Trump, Perdue, Sanford Bishop, and then Austin Scott. I did not read every story about the disaster, but I thought Sanford Bishop took a much of a quieter role in this, and I was initially surprised. Now, Sanford Bishop by nature is a very quiet guy. Maybe he wasn't looking for the microphone like a lot of other politicians do this day. So my point being is I don't know if local guys down there could make an argument saying, well, where the hell were you, Sanford? I never saw you pound the pavement, hit the desk screaming. So I don't know if that could be used against him. It's an awfully favorable district for the Democrats. When it was redrawn, to keep him safe and to keep Austin Scott safe. I don't think Austin has to worry about that. No. And again, as we mentioned before, when both Perdue and Trump have to rack up such huge margins in the GOP counties down in southwest and south central Georgia that you're right that any slippage of that could mean some real problems in a really tight race. And when you have to rely on 80% of the vote in a county so you can win statewide, that's a heck of a threshold that you have to maintain every couple of years. 80%. Oh my.
Well, and you have to consider who he'll be running against as well. I mean, right now, Teresa Tomlinson is, the
sole nominee.
The sole nominee. So does a candidate like Teresa Tomlinson really resonate in rural Georgia where the impact was felt by the delay of this disaster relief package?
I think Senator Perdue has done enough to have this not be a defining issue. He wrote an op-ed for The Hill, I think, last week, outlining a couple solutions that we could look at in the future in terms essentially like a rainy day fund where we could just distribute this money automatically. It didn't have to be a legislative process. So he outlined a couple what he would call solutions. So I think he's probably done enough to get this as a negative off the plate. Now he might come back and try and say it as a positive that I fought for us. So I don't know.
He did enough work, I think, showing each step along the way that he was working on it. He just can't prove the success that was immediate. But it might be enough just to show, as Preston was saying, that look, I dropped 4 different bills. I went up to the White House 7 times. He did enough on that front.
And it's done now.
Well, he can and he will, blame the Democrats, of course, and he'll have President Trump's backing in doing that.
And then Trump will blame the Dems, and Sanford Bishop will blame the GOP, and Tomlinson will blame the GOP. Will blame Trump.
So in terms of the political kind of degradation, I was a little late to this Pew Research Center article that I was going to mention at the end of the show, but I think it's relevant now, so I'm going to slide it on up. Talking about
your show.
I know. Talking about the divisiveness of the two parties, and everything I read was like, well, that's to be expected, but it's a nice aggregate of data. We'll post the link to it on Twitter if you want to read it, but I'm going to read a quick quote from it. The bottom line is this: across 10 measures that Pew Research Center has tracked on the same surveys since the year I was 1 year old, the average partisan gap has increased from 15 percentage points to 36 percentage points.
What year?
1994.
Thank you.
So to translate that, essentially they asked their polling sample over the last however many years since 94, how do you feel about this issue? And Republicans would answer one way, Democrats would answer the other way. And that usually had a gap where you could draw the median line between the two parties. That gap is now wider than it has ever been, and it has gotten substantially wider at a quicker rate since 2013, 2014. It's not coming back together. I think this is one of those moments we look at where we're seeing the residual effects of that. Now, disaster relief is not a policy issue, but the median member of each party is now further apart than maybe they have ever been since, the Civil War. Political parties are now the most dividing line between two people that you can have, more than income, more than race, and more than educational background. So this is a residual effect of that. I see it as that. And I don't know how you come back from that. I mean, it's going to be up to the next generation of politicians to try and rectify that, but the snowball is rolling down the hill.
Yeah, I've had this conversation over social media and in this room. It feels like a dozen times where I continue to question what matters still in politics. What makes someone on either side of the aisle, switch? What and in my opinion, whether a farmer can continue to pay his bills and send his kids to school and keep them fed, if that doesn't change the way someone votes, I really don't know what does. But I've been surprised a lot in the last couple of years. So
that's such a big overarching statement. I don't know how to begin to respond to that. I mean, that's a professor teaches a whole seminar on that question. So I don't know. So in a 10-second reply,
well, I think the question generally is what still affects the way somebody votes. What issues still matter? And I think you would say the economy, right? And it doesn't get much more local economy driven than but how somebody's able to pay their bills.
Yeah, I agree, but I've been reading a lot about the 2004 presidential election lately. So Bush v. Kerry, and Bush did remarkably better in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, than a lot of people thought he would, because Kerry was trying to focus everything on jobs. The Rust Belt was really hurting in the 4 years of the Bush administration. But Bush instead changed tactics, and he focused in on the social. He focused in on the cultural, that sort of maybe the first card of what conservatives say now, that the American lifestyle, the American values are completely being lost, completely being taken away.
America is on the wrong track.
Yeah, and it's not even lost. It's being taken away. That now there is an active group of individuals who are taking away and are mocking the values that you hold dear, that your grandparents hold dear, and they're particularly and specifically fighting to take them away from you. So to answer your question, yes, but you can't shortchange the idea of that cultural war element to it, which started well before 2004, but W. Bush specifically used that to sort of counter some of the economic claims. So I mean, Obama, when Obama won in 2008, he did it primarily on the economic issue because of the Great Recession. So when you have an extreme case like that, then the economic issues will outweigh everything else. But unless you're in a really bad economic time, I think the cultural war element to it is going to fight equal with an economic argument.
And I would say that the cultural and the economic issues are starting to merge a little bit, because what's the biggest cultural side we hear from mostly the GOP is saying we have to fight against socialism. And people see socialism as not only an economic but also a cultural shift that they're afraid of. So I think those are starting to merge, and that line of attack is becoming all the more prevalent.
Sure.
All right. Hit us with another listener question, Hans.
All right. Next question. Sarah in Atlanta. Democrats just launched the Georgia House Majority Project. How likely is it they gain the majority
seats
in the legislature after 2020?
I think whoever wrote the press release did a really good job to get that to Bluestein so he could write a story about it. There's nothing new there. The Democrats formed a committee.
But it's an excuse to talk about how likely we think it is.
I don't know.
They're always trying to gain the majority.
Who wrote that question?
Sarah in Atlanta.
Sarah, I just want to let you know that I think, as far as I know, and I don't know everything, there's 3 committees right now that have been in existence for years on the Republican side to keep the majority.
Sure.
So welcome to the ball game. I don't mean to sound cynical about it, but them forming a committee doesn't mean anything.
Well, what are the odds they take back the majority then?
Small. They just don't. I mean, you've pointed it out before. They would have to win every race that is deemed to be a toss-up, and then win some more that aren't even on anybody's map. I mean, which is distinctly possible. I mean, the Republicans took control of the U.S. Congress in 1994, and no one thought it was possible. I mean, it's always possible.
Well, I think part of Sarah's question, the context may be that Democrats in Georgia may feel that this year they have a better chance than they've had in previous years when such a committee has existed.
And enthusiasm like that is intoxicating. I mean, I was part of that enthusiasm back in the late 90s and early aughts when we took over, when we were the minority party and then took over the House and the Senate. I remember that feeling. I love the idea that you're always on the upswing. You're always on the offensive. You always want to be on the offensive in politics, if for no other reason. It feels so much better than being on the defensive. So, right now they're feeling their oats. They're feeling on the offensive. I mean, God bless them. They'll be back to the point where they're back on the defensive.
How many seats do they have to flip?
16.
16.
I think, as someone who looks at the map a lot as part of their job, the nightmare scenario for me is, all of these committees and all of these huge fundraising organizations, we get the 16. I say we. I'm taking my host hat off. The Democrats get the 16, and they get the seats they need, and then they lose the 7 they got last year, or the 11 they got last year. So you're not
winning a majority and losing the gains in North Fulton.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to look at the best places to go spend money, to go spend resources, and keeping the gains you made, and then also spreading that out to the rest of, I guess, suburban Georgia is really the only place you can pick it up.
I was about to say, do you really have any interest in trying to win back the seat in Warner Robins or Vidalia? I mean, do you really want to spend any money there? I mean, there have been a number of special elections since Kemp took office. Any of them, they were all in rural Georgia. The Dems didn't even run anybody in a lot of these. It was 4 Republicans on the ballot. That was it.
By the way, you need 16 seats. There are exactly 16 seats where the Republican last year won with less than 55% of the vote. So there's your map. The problem is, like Craig said, those are coin tosses. In best case scenario, those are coin tosses, because a lot of times we're talking about 54.9%. So those are coin tosses. You have to win every single one. It's just so hard.
The good news, if Sarah is hoping that happens, is that in an environment where 16 seats are flipped, you're likely not losing some of those gains from 2018.
True. I mean, if you're winning a seat out in Jackson County, you're not losing the seat in Johns Creek.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's.
I would put it at less than 50%. I think for sure that they come back with a majority. I'm probably getting back to 25 or 30, but of course we'll have a higher turnout, supposedly. A lot of those races were closer than we think, but as the consultant person at the table, a lot of me thinks the last cycle was the chance, because now the people who used to win with 62%, who just won with 53%, are going to actually run races.
Yeah, there's a wake up element to that.
Yeah, and I say Rob Woodall. He's a federal legislator, not a state legislature, but there aren't going to be Rob Woodalls anymore. Rob Woodall kind of waited to campaign until the last couple weeks and then ran a TV ad. The people who know they're vulnerable are going to do more than they did before they knew, obviously.
And I'm not a turnout expert, but we have to remember, and there's sort of a humorous thing since we talk so much about the 7th CD, Trump actually won the 7th CD. And then Abrams then turns around and wins it by this humongous event. Now, you can make several conclusions by that Abrams just ran this perfect campaign, the Republicans ignored it, or the Republicans had no Trump turnout, or that Trump turnout's going to come back out again. Is Trump going to do better in the 7th or worse in the 7th than he did in 2016? I don't know. I can make an argument for both. So the fact that it's a Trump year, I don't immediately think that it means doomsday on some of these legislative seats. Others, sure. I think it's a real problem. But some of these others that we immediately say, oh, yeah, Trump, he's going to screw him. I'm like, no, wait a minute. He actually won that CD. You always have to factor that in.
Mm-hmm. Well, related, I think, to answer the question again, I think a lot of it does depend. We talked about how partisan everything is in politics these days. A lot of some of these very local House seats will depend on who the Democrats nominate for president for the 2020 race.
Well, and they're finding...
Is that a segue to one of those questions?
They're finding quality candidates to run in congressional seats, too, that, not to be negative Nancy, but are just kind of unwinnable for the Democrats. But those have residual effects. Like Beto O'Rourke likes to say, he didn't win in Texas, but he helped flip the state legislature because of residual effects his statewide campaign have. So, I agree with you. A lot of those things will be important. And the Democrats trying to play everywhere on the congressional level will be helpful.
So I'm wearing my Beto hat for those not watching the YouTube channel. Did you see that? Sorry, segue. Did you see the poll about Beto O'Rourke and how Texans feel about his presidential run?
No.
27% of Texans approve of his presidential run.
That's so bad.
66% would rather see him run for Senate.
Wow.
Yeah.
66
would rather see him still run for Senate, even now after he's announced.
I'm thinking back to a very early episode we had, but I think it was Craig who said on the show, we have to come back to a time where there's a downside to running for president.
Mm-hmm.
And that
I've said that a couple times.
Yeah, we can't just have everybody do it as a best way to sell their book. And there are a lot of candidates right now.
When's the Texas, I'm showing my geek here, Texas has a very early qualifying date because Texas's primaries are very early. They're like in March, which means your qualifying date, your qualifying date has to be in December then, which would mean Beto, if he decided to change his mind to follow the will of the polled people, would have to jump out of the race even before the New Hampshire primary.
And he doesn't look like change his mind.
He doesn't look like he's.
Shout out to David Heenan, who is a previous panelist on this show. He has a theory that is why we are seeing so many candidates in the field, is that while running for president, they can raise as much money as they want right now, and then transfer that money to future Senate races or governor's races or whatever.
I suppose
whatever the future holds.
Yeah,
no, that's if you're too obvious with that, that's a little. But
I do think.
But point taken. That's a possibility.
I do think Chuck Schumer's got to be a little concerned about. We have to save some quality people. And who was
hashtag where's Chuck? Absolutely.
Sherrod Brown,
Ohio.
From Ohio, basically dropped out of. He never got in, but he dropped out of the presidential race, basically saying somebody's got to stay home and watch the kids.
God bless Sherrod Brown.
Yeah,
he's not up this year.
No, but I think he was. I think he was saying if we all abandon the
saying of
the
other
Senate.
people.
Right.
Yes. Oh, I thought he was talking about himself.
No.
I'm sorry.
Somebody's got to stay home and watch the kids.
The brain drain is a term for a reason.
Yeah.
And there's a Georgia element to that, too. All these people running for the 6th, all these people running for the 7th. Some of these guys who are running for these seats that we've never heard of, have no experience. My first reaction is, well, why don't they run for the state house first? Whose state house district do they live in? Whose Senate district do they live in?
There was CNN had another one of their town hall nights, which are very interesting and entertaining to watch. But they had back-to-back. They had Tim Ryan, Eric Swalwell, and the congressman from Maryland who I can't
Delaney?
Maybe
Delaney?
It was Delaney or somebody else. But again, I was reading those names and I'm like, man, I wish I could know the substantial differences between any of those people. And it's getting so difficult. All right.
Sorry to throw us off track.
No, that's okay. Next listener question is going to get us a little insidery. So I apologize in advance, but I've been yearning to talk about it, so I'm glad we have a question on it. This is Austin from Macon. Do you agree with the DCCC policy that blacklist consultants that work on primary campaigns? A little bit of context on this. This is an issue in a race we're having where Michael Owens, I believe is his name, is trying to unseat the Democratic incumbent who we already talked about, right?
David Scott.
David Scott. I get him confused with Sanford Bishop. I apologize.
Boy, but somebody used to work in the legislature. David Scott's a legend down there.
We're doing an early morning recording.
David Scott's a legend under the Gold Dome. Just for his
We're doing an
suits,
early
nothing
morning
else.
recording. I apologize. So he's trying to unseat David Scott for the second time and has come out kind of publicly at odds with this policy from the DCCC that if a consultant or anybody in that field works with the person who's trying to challenge an incumbent, they get blacklisted from the DCCC. And, for most consultants that would go work on a congressional race like that, that's kind of a death sentence. So, this is what the party has decided is going to be their way to shore up the seats that should be shored up. So
it sure seems pretty tone deaf, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the most prominent kind of figures in terms of social following have come out against it pretty clearly, and in part because they beat standing Republicans. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez beat the person who was in line for a pretty high-level leadership position in New York on a huge upset. So I feel like the party is trying to find a solution to a problem they don't really want to think about.
Yeah. And
I don't know if you want me commenting on
I
this.
do. Yeah.
The NRCC and the NRSC has I've never heard the term blacklist, but they have very clear policies that we support and endorse incumbents. Unless you're indicted or you're really tainted for some reason, like Stephen King out in Iowa, we're going to back you, and we're going to back you with our money and our energy and our efforts and our manpower. But I've never ever heard them blacklist. So this is something a little bit new in the field. I'm surprised to do it because I guess that they don't seem to recognize, at least in my opinion, that the Democratic Party is very much in flux. They don't know what they want to be in a couple of years. Do they want to be the party of Biden, or do they want to be the party of AOC or Elizabeth Warren, whoever you want to pick? And that's why the Democratic primaries next year are so important. What are we going to be as a party? So it sounds like something Rahm Emanuel would have done. I mean, when he was the head of the DCCC back in 2006, he was very clear, we're running moderate candidates, and he won, and they took the House back, and he won it with very moderate guys. Heath Schuler from North Carolina comes to mind, who then a couple of years later turned around and was the first person to challenge Nancy Pelosi for the speakership, or for minority leader, or whatever the time was. And but they immediately paid the price for it by having this more divisive divided caucus. So you'll get the majority, but there's a negative to having the majority, because now you're going to lose 20 people on a lot of votes. You got to pick your poison a little bit. So I'm just surprised they did it.
I mean,
and they also don't differentiate between challenging incumbents in very safe Democratic seats, like AOC by beating Joe Crowley.
Sure.
There was no chance that she was going to lose in the general. To a certain extent, I would understand not a policy, but a rule of thumb that, hey, guys, don't challenge incumbents like a Lucy McBath
that
in
are
6
in
that just highly
areas.
toss-up districts. But in districts that are safe blue districts, by all means, run on the issues and see who wins.
It does sound like something that should be talked about, not in public,
right,
as Craig would say.
One of those things you say the quiet part out loud.
And that a blanket rule doesn't work. You're right.
And I wouldn't be, if someone came up to me, if Haley Barbour came into this room right now and told me, oh yeah, we had a rule. Same rule back in the 90s, but we didn't tell anybody about it.
Sure.
That's what you do.
Would not surprise me at all.
When they probably did.
Yeah, they probably.
But they didn't say it out loud.
They didn't say it.
Right.
I mean, I think, the justification I hear is that they're trying to counteract the idea that in primaries, the most progressive members of the party come out to vote. But
Wow, film at 11. That's a
I know,
revelation right there.
So sure, that's fine, but that's your problem. Like, you can't solve that by just deleting the idea of a primary. Like, you need to inspire moderates to make their voice heard as the future of the party. Like, if you're only going to inspire the progressives to want to be the future, then that's your problem as a party.
And what does that tell the progressives who are members of your party?
Yeah. I find it all very frustrating, as I think was very predictable.
No, I mean, this might be too big picture. This might be too vague to be of any use. But when you become a party leader, you have to appreciate and look at the party as an entity separate from the candidates themselves, or maybe even separate from the issues themselves. The party has to survive and move on to the next cycle, and to the next cycle, and to the next cycle. And therefore, you have to take a step back, divorce yourself from the personalities, from the candidates, say what's good for the party this cycle and cycles down the line. And I think that when you become a chairman of a DCC or a RNC chairman, you get that perspective that separates yourself a little bit. And that can get you in trouble from forums like this and critiques that you're not following the grassroots anymore, or what have you. But I think there's a role to that. The guy stepping back and thinking big picture.
Yeah, I mean, it's the governing as a blanket that I think gets them in trouble. Because I think, like you said, somebody who tried to run an insurgent challenger to Lucy McBath from the left, they're not going to have great relationships with the party down the line anyways. I don't think you need to have a blanket blacklist. I mean, it is a threat of a press release, essentially, that's going out, that's trying to hold off challengers that they're not even sure exist yet at this point, or exist in the pivotal races, not the ones that they're going to win, almost regardless of who's on the ballot. All right, that's all the time we have for listener questions. We will get to the rest next time we do a mailbag episode, but let's close this week the same way with what we are watching coming up. I will start to give our panelists a little time. Mine is not politics related at all. Well, it's probably got a little politics in it, which is the Women's World Cup starts today. I am very excited to watch a good American soccer team play, because it's been a little while since I've seen one of those. They're probably the outright favorite to win. They don't play for another couple days. We're recording on Friday, so the opener between France, the host country, and Japan, I believe, is today.
How does England look?
Good, like a semifinal contender, but I still think U.S. is a semis lock at the very least.
I'm an Anglophile, an amateur one, because I don't take it that seriously. But I always root for England when it comes to international sports. And if England and the U.S. played in the World Cup final, I don't know, man. I'd be split. I'd be split.
It'll be fun.
I'd root for some sort of weird rule change for a tie. But no, I'll only watch the Women's World Cup if England is playing.
Well, they're playing, so there you go. Good news for you.
Right.
But it's going to be a lot of fun. It's all on Fox Sports, so everybody should watch and cheer on a good American team, the first we've had in a while. All right, Hans.
So not a look forward, but a small look back. Yesterday was the 75th anniversary of D-Day. You can piggyback. It's a big one. You can piggyback with me.
I have a different angle. I assure you I have a different angle.
It was pretty important.
Okay. Well, yeah, mine is just a, it's a thank you to everyone who served, especially the troops who were involved in that historic moment 75 years ago. And a tip of the hat to the greatest generation.
Yeah, I consider myself an amateur historian on World War II. When I was in high school, it was like 2 years. All I did
You're professional now because we put it on
that's true,
podcast.
But you're not paying me.
You didn't have to tell anybody that.
All I did was read World War II books, so I feel like I'm a fairly good amateur expert on D-Day, and it always humors me. I'll make this very simple. We Americans we forget so quickly how the Russian foreign minister held a press conference yesterday, basically saying, "You damn Americans, you damn Westerners, you keep forgetting that we were the ones who lost to 20 million people. We had battles that you guys couldn't even comprehend. You're whitewashing us. You're taking us out of the history books. D-Day was great. We honored them, but it was nowhere near the relevant battle." And you know what's funny? I was thinking the exact same thing. And I was even thinking about posting something similar on Facebook about it. But then when the Russian foreign minister came out and said the same thing, it's like, whoa, there's no way in hell I'm allying myself with these guys. So that was an element to it. And I also want to remind everybody, because I see it more on the conservative side. Yes, we did have allies. Yes, it wasn't just America that invaded. The British were there. The British played a preeminent role. The British had supplied more equipment, more manpower, more planes, more everything to the invasion. I actually like to say that the June 6th is the last great day of the British Empire, because June 7th, the very next day, was when the American preeminence in the Western Alliance really started to show. That's when the manpower and the machinery really started to come in, because June 6th is great, but we all forget June 7th, the plan kind of grounded to a halt. We didn't really know what the heck was going on at that point. I mean, the Battle of Normandy took a month. It was only supposed to take like a week. But it was really slow going, and the casualties were really mounting, and the British couldn't replenish the tanks and the men that they were losing, but the Americans were just landing troops after troops after troops. And so the energy immediately shifted to the American side, and then when we had the breakout, it was all American at that point. So the Anglophile in me always comes out every June 6th.
Did you see Dunkirk?
I did see Dunkirk. I didn't like it. I liked it for its technical aspects, but it didn't give you the picture of what Dunkirk was like. It gave you all these small little stories.
Maybe not for someone who was there.
But let me phrase it this way. At the end of the movie, you had no clue that they moved 325,000 men off the beaches. No clue. You just thought it was a small little evacuation. It was great. It was the only time they even mentioned it was when Kenneth Branagh, who played that naval guy on the dock, said, yeah, we did great. We got 300,000 guys off. Okay, great. You didn't get that impression from the movie. You just thought it was these little stories. My favorite D-Day movie, and I mentioned this on Facebook because I hate all the time, because people keep saying, watch Saving Private Ryan if you want to understand D-Day. It's like, no, you don't watch Saving Private Ryan. You watch The Longest Day from 1961-62. You actually see that movie and you get an appreciation for what D-Day was, the scale, the size, the plan. You actually can watch that movie without reading a book. Saving Private Ryan doesn't teach you anything, except that war is hell.
Do you have a favorite D-Day book?
There's one called Six Armies in Normandy, which is really good because it talks about the British, the Germans, the French. I even think they talk about the Americans. I even think they talk about the Polish who were there.
Okay.
That's good. But The Longest Day, I mean, if you ever really just want to sit down and read something quick and simple, Longest Day, the book, is something.
All right. Daniel, you can call this one the World War II episode. All right. That has been the Georgia Politics Podcast. I am your host, Preston Thompson. For Hans Appen and Craig Kidd, I am signing off for the next 2 weeks. We will hopefully have another interview coming to you next week, so stay tuned to your feed. Send us questions on Twitter at GAPoliticsPod. Subscribe to the show, share it with your friends, and we will talk to everybody in 2 weeks.
Good show.
Excellent.
Not bad.
Hey, you end on a World War
How many
II.
questions did we get through?
6.
How many were on that sheet? 12?
Save the rest.
11.